girl is turning to Jesus. Says, no, I've committed my life to virginity. I'm totally committed to the Lord. And an example of, I suppose, what we call 3rd century toxic masculinity, boy denounces girl to the authorities because she's a Christian. And it happens to be a time when Christians were being persecuted in that part of Sicily. Agatha is denounced. She's arrested, she's put in prison, she's tortured. I will not go into the details. Needless to say, it would probably even give a TV show like Netflix a problem in putting it onto screen. She's then thrown into prison, and she dies in prison. The year is 251, and she's somewhere between the age of about 18 and 20. This is who we honour, Agatha. What do we make of this story? One of the things we could look at is this whole theme of suffering. Go back to the letter to the Hebrews. Suffering is what you must expect. It makes you grow. Maybe. But suffering can also destroy you. Suffering can turn you from a human being into a wreck. If you've ever explored the literature of therapists who deal with victims of torture, you'll hear this time and again. So be very careful in glorifying suffering, even as we celebrate the martyrdom of St. Agatha. Be very careful too of overplaying, as I think we Catholics do, the fact that she's a virgin and a martyr. The biblical understanding of virginity has many meanings. One of them, I would say, is not something that I would consider to be likable in our current age. All about how much money you get when you sell your daughter to the husband. That's it. That is one of the big issues about virginity. But thankfully, the Bible isn't just about that. Virginity is also the description that we hear in the prophets of Israel, of an Israel that has returned to the Lord. Steadfast, faithful, courageous to the very end. And it's mirrored in the book of Revelation. It's interesting. It struck me as I was trying to reflect on these readings, how much the language of that steadfastness can also be the language of what we basically would call martyrdom. A willingness to follow to the end. To the point where many would call you stubborn, stupid, crazy. Martyrdom is what might be called the willingness to live in truth. I use that term, I borrow it from the great Czech playwright and former President Václav Havel, writing in a time when he was part of the dissident movement, at a time when he and his colleagues from the Charter 77 movement were being harassed and persecuted by the Czech government. He writes an article in which he says, sometimes you can't do anything great. Sometimes you can't overthrow a corrupt regime. Sometimes you can't end a war. But there are always ways to live in truth. And he uses an example of a grocer, fruit and veg guy, running a shop in Prague under the communist regime. And he puts up all these wonderful slogans in his shop. And as he said, he may not believe a word of it. In fact, he may believe completely the opposite. But then what happens when someone comes into the shop wearing some lapel badge indicating dissent, support for the Charter 77 movement? Do you turn a blind eye? Do you confront the person? Say, you know, this is not a very sensible thing to do, you could get in trouble. Or do you tear down the hypocrisy that you are celebrating? The Huddle reminds us that it's often the small acts, small symbolic things, done with a certain relentless commitment to follow them through no matter what, that make a difference. We cannot change 100% of things, but we can change ourselves. I think people like Agatha are examples to us of living in truth. She didn't hide that she was a Christian, even though at the time there was persecution going on. But she didn't compromise. She didn't try and rationalize things away. She didn't try and softly put him down and say, look, my dear, I'm actually betrothed to another, and I hope it just goes away like a gentleman, and everything goes back to normal. She speaks the truth. I have promised my life in fullness to God. I cannot marry you. Sorry. No matter how nice you are, no matter how smart a chariot you drive, I can't marry you. And she's willing to go through that suffering. Not because she wants it. Anyone who wants to be a martyr is not worthy of being a martyr. Probably slightly crazy, because it isn't nice. But what you really see with a person like her is the total opposite of those folks that we read of in the gospel today, who can't see that Jesus is living in truth. And so they construct a whole fabrication around who is he? Where did he get these ideas? Where's he coming from? Who's putting him up to it? And then, ultimately, but he's nobody special, he's just, comes from this place, we know his family. And why were they offended? Because I think for the most part, we don't really want to live in truth. We want to live in our convenient narratives, to use a postmodern term. Lies, fantasies, to be harder. We live an image. We don't live who we are. Living in truth. That can get you killed. It got Agatha killed. It got other martyrs killed. It gets people killed to this day. On every continent. And what do we make of that then? What do we do with it? I would say that when we look at martyrdom, we move beyond masochism to living in truth. To people who live in truth to the end, not willing to compromise that truth. In many ways, today when we look at martyrdom as a subject, as you know, I teach. Anyone wants to come along next year, you're welcome. I'm afraid we've already got the classes going this term. You see how many different types of martyrdom there are. And all the debates we get caught up in over, was he really a martyr? Or was he just a political activist who used the church? Or was she really a martyr, or was she just neurotic? Once again, in many ways, the moment we start asking those questions, how often are we actually sounding like the crowd in today's gospel? The traditional definition of a martyr was someone who dies because of hatred of the faith. We can modify it in different ways by saying it's an aspect of the faith, as Rana does, and I think it's a very useful term. But I want to get back to the traditional definition, because I think faith means much more than we sometimes think. Is faith just an acknowledgement of a set of propositions? Is it simply the willing suspension of disbelief in some cases when something's on the creed sound a little bit weird to us? Or is faith how we live Christian life? Just an observation from a theologian, Albert Nolan. He said once, faith is not primarily a way of thinking, it is a way of living. We talk about the practice of the faith, but in a very important sense, the practice is our faith. It implies certain convictions or beliefs. What people really believe cannot be ascertained without any degree of certainty. By listening to what they profess to believe, you can see without doubt what they really believe by observing what they do in practice. You judge a tree by its fruits. Faith, then, is a particular kind of practice. A practice of living in truth. The practice of being uncompromising. Whatever one believes. In that sense, martyrdom is much wider than we imagine. And I think that's good. Because what do we do? Profess our faith? Nice. As we do every Sunday. Live it every day? Let's keep in mind Agatha and Václav Havel.